Hi, this is Jeff Altman, and welcome to Job Search Radio on webtalkradio.net. I decided to bring back my guest from last time, Ellis Chase, because he's done a great job with us last time. And in case you haven't listened to it yet, Ellis is one of Manhattan's top career management consultants. By the way, that's Manhattan, New York, not Manhattan, Kansas. And he's also an executive coach who's worked with individuals and groups across a broad spectrum of industries and has been a consultant to the Columbia Business School for more than 11 years. His book, In Search of the Fun Forever Job, offers a real-life approach to job hunting in line with today's economic realities. Ellis, welcome back.
Good to be back, Jeff.
Thank you. You know, when I think of the way people brand themselves, it often starts with meeting someone that you haven't seen in a long time in what's called the traditional elevator pitch, which I'm not a real big fan of, to be honest with you. It just feels like people dumping on one another. Hi, let me tell you in 30 seconds exactly what I do, with one of those, false grabbers that people often use. What do you think about the traditional elevator pitch?
I hate it. I hate the phrase elevator pitch because it's exactly what you just said. It sounds like you're waylaying somebody and cornering them in the elevator. And as I tell people, especially now during holiday season when this is being taped, I don't want people going to holiday parties and saying, hi, here's everything I've ever done in my life, and I want to network with you, which, of course, is the world's worst cornering situation. I look at it in a very different way. I look at it as branding and answering the question, not offering it, but answering it. Yes, of course, there can be a 10-second variation for the elevator because you want to get somebody's business card, which is fine. 10 seconds is enough. I'm talking about 1.5 minutes to 2 minutes with 5 key deliverables that answers the question, tell me about yourself, and in a variety of other settings, which we'll talk about a little later.
That's interesting. So, in the elevator, you might just say, hey, great running into you. You got a card with you? Instead of going into that pitch that people are often encouraged to do.
Exactly. I would pretty much have a sentence of I'm looking at or I am and I'm really interested in what you do. I'd love to talk with you sometime. Boom, done. It's like that's why they call it the elevator pitch. It's instead of going into 2 minutes of and then I did this and then I did that.
And I remember when the elevator pitch was the hot technique. It was the 30-second commercial for who it is, what you do, with some corny intro that always made my eyes glaze over. And your approach is much more human, which frankly is in line with what I believe people should be, human beings talking to one another.
So that would be my take on elevator pitch, and which is exactly the same as yours. What I'm talking about is a more formal branding statement that has to be prepared, that you don't offer. It's only when you're asked about it. It's like, in the first 30 days of a new job, somebody says, so what have you been doing? Or on the formal job interview, when they say, tell me about yourself, or let's run through your resume, that idiot question, let's run through your resume, you're prepared with 1.5 minutes, a branding statement, rather than doing what everybody else does, which is I'm now going to recite my resume. And that, talk about eyes glazing over, that's where you lose an interviewer. That's when you lose somebody when you're building new relationships or networking. You're not going to do it that way. What you're going to do is going to be hardcore information.
So what I'm hearing you say, and I just want to make sure I got it right, is number one, do this on an interview. But I also thought I heard you say you're going to do this when you circle back to the person or you meet someone at a network group meeting where you just kind of talk about what you've been doing. Did I get that right?
Yes, because with friends, for example, and I think that when you're doing relationship building, what I call high-touch relationship building, when you're doing that kind of relationship building, you do not want to be assuming that they know what you are professionally or what your brand is. So you want to make sure that they hear some of those hardcore skills. So I have a model for what your template is, and then you take off on the template for each situation. I absolutely forbid my clients or students to script anything. I don't want anything memorized or robot-like or mechanical in any way. I need it to be for the situation, but I also think there should be 5 deliverables from any pitch in a formal situation. Again, not in the elevator.
So what goes into those five points?
Okay. First is make sure that somebody knows exactly what you are, because you never want an interviewer or somebody you're meeting in a relationship building event, you never want anybody saying, what the hell is this person? Or somebody uses a bunch of 30,000-foot view labels and nobody knows what they mean. It's like, especially on the interview, I am a, and here's what I do, boom, so that the hook is out there. So that's imperative. For people who are making changes, then it can be a positioning statement. It can be, I am a combination of this and that. But at least is saying to somebody, here's what I am, so you have no problem misunderstanding me.
That's interesting. And that one statement, I run into people sometimes who find jobs because their kids have a play date. And somewhere along the line, the kid says to the adult in the room that mom or dad is out looking for a job and this is what they do, and suddenly they wind up with an interview. And it's probably because of statements as clear as what you're talking about.
Exactly. So it's got to be, that's the problem with people reciting resumes. And then I did this, and then I got a job taking tolls at the Lincoln Tunnel, and then I got promoted to counter of change, and then I was vice president of silver, and then I got laid off, and then I found another job.
I got it, Ellis. I got it.
It's like, so, then the person who's talking to you says, well, what the hell are you? Because what do you do? What are your skills? What can you do for me? Or who can I introduce you to? Whatever the situation is. So that first statement is major.
Mm-hmm.
Backing it
up.
What's
the second point?
That's the backing it up. Number 2 is about 80% of what this 1.5 to 2 minutes should be, which is 2 or 3 skill areas that you have. I have expertise in, or I have background in, or I have experience in, and boom, boom, and boom with a little tiny blurb for each one of those. So, as I said, this is a lot of deliverables in less than 2 minutes, because you want the chance to tell people what you are and what you can do. So those 2 or 3 skills that you talk about, of course you're going to be matching up to what you think the person you're talking to is going to be interested in.
That's interesting, and I want to circle back to that point a little bit later when I talk about interviewing with you.
Okay.
So, again, we go from that clear statement about what you do into 2 or 3 different skills that you have experience with.
It's like writing a term paper for college when I don't know if you remember back in the Stone Age when they were teaching you how to write a term paper, and you had to learn how to do a topic sentence, and everything else you did in the paper was supposed to point to the topic sentence. That's what these skills are. They have to point to that initial statement that you said. So this is a marketing thing. This is my brand. I'm bringing it with me from place to place. So those 2, the number 1 and number 2, the label and the skills and or experiences or expertise, those are the critical pieces of it. The other 3 are much easier and surprising.
So let's get into some of the surprises here. What's the next one?
The expression, unique selling proposition, the advertising expression.
You bet.
Well, unique selling proposition is a little bit of an overstatement. I like to call it the unusual selling proposition, so we can take the pressure off. But what separates you from your competition? So the kind of statement you want to make is, what makes me unusual in my business is that I have it from both this side or that side, front office, back office, whatever it is. Something that makes you a little bit different, a hook. And that, I think, is one of the hardest parts.
You know, I was going to put this off until a little bit later, but I've got a theory of interviewing. I know Hal Klegman asked me about in an earlier show. And the idea is, instead of walking in passively to an interview, I encourage people that as soon as they sit down for the interview, you just thank the interviewer for making time to speak with them. And then from there, and I'll be the recruiter in this that they reference. So I spoke with Jeff Altman about the job, and he gave me a brief description. But I want to get your take on it. Could you tell me about the role as you see it and what I can do to help? Which is kind of drawing out the information at the beginning of the interview so that you can tailor your answer to what matters to them.
I love that.
And then from there, when we get to the opening question, the tell me about yourself question that you're referencing here in your unusual selling proposition, there's a pretty standard formula for answering that question. And then from there, I ask people, as soon as they're done with that 30 to 40 seconds of that, to pause for just a beat and then simply say, but I'm sure you hear stuff like that from other people pretty regularly. But what makes me different is, and then they would go into that unusual selling proposition that would differentiate them from the average.
I love this, because what we're doing here is there are two angles on what we're doing is focusing on the interview here, and the two angles is you're finding out, you're getting some clarification about what the responsibilities and tasks of a function are, and you're tailoring your pitch to it subsequently. You'll notice I would never say you have to announce your pitch right away. As Jeff said earlier, you don't want to just all of a sudden corner somebody and just blow them away with you. You want to sort of feel it out a little bit. But you also must get the brand in there, and you want to tailor it to what you have just found out about what the job responsibilities are, if it's a job interview. If it's networking, that's, relationship building is a little bit different. See, in
what way, Ellis? How might you do it a little bit differently?
It's less formal. It's going to be, you don't have to get the pitch in right away. You don't have to you're certainly not asking about a job description because there is no job. What you're really after is advice, information. You're looking eventually to get introductions to other people. You're looking to solidify a relationship. You're looking to plant seeds for a continued relationship. But that's a whole other conversation. That's the psychology of networking, about how do I keep people warm, which is something I probably learned from you many years ago about keeping your clients warm. Right?
And how did I do that with you back then? Do you remember?
Yes, I certainly do. I was a staffing person at a financial services institution known as the Chase Manhattan Bank.
Ooh, tell me what it was like in the Stone Ages again, Ellis.
And you were one of my core recruiters at that time, executive search firms. And so I learned so much from you and from the other. There was only a few people that I worked with because I didn't like the whole 350 people knocking on the door. And what I learned was about tailoring, always about tailoring. I also learned about perseverance. I also learned about relationship building over a period of time and developing it and keeping it warm, keeping the relationship warm. So you were keeping me warm, and you were also keeping your prospective clients, for me, warm while I was trying to get the line people to make up their minds about whether they were going to hire somebody or not. So this is all of a piece to me.
And that is exactly what I was doing. Now, just for the listeners, when Ellis was speaking of prospective clients, I'll translate that into job hunters, just so we get a little clarity about the meaning of the word client here. And part of what we're always doing is looking for ways to create connection with other people so that they want to talk with you. And again, just going back to the beginning of this show, the traditional elevator pitch makes people want to get away from you rather than ever talk to you. And what I'm hearing from Ellis so far is everything that's designed to build trust and rapport and relationship, perhaps with someone you haven't seen in a while, and perhaps with someone new, that will cause them to want to continue the conversation.
And precisely the reason why I tell people not to script a pitch ever. It's a bullet point or a series of bullet points or an outline, and it has to be tailored to the situation. Like Jeff just mentioned, the person you haven't seen in a long time, which is one of my favorite scenarios. Are you going to talk to that person the same way you're going to talk like to a stranger? It's going to be different, and it's going to be different bullet points, and it's going to be different reminders. So
true.
Back to the term paper, you know.
So we've got 3 points so far, and I'll be summarizing for everyone a little bit later. What's the fourth one on your list?
This is the biggest surprise of all, which is everybody thinks that a pitch is, and then I worked here, and then I worked there, like I was talking about the toll taker before, right? And the point to the toll taker was boring. Plus, if it's a job interview, they have your resume, so why would you bother reciting it? Or if it's a networking meeting, you don't want to sound like you're asking for a job anyway. What you're after is relationship. So this is just a sentence of where you've worked. Are you going to use the brand? Are you going to use the functional reason for being of the organization that you worked for? Sometimes you're going to mix it up. Like if you worked for Acme.com during the .com situation in 1998, then why would you say Acme.com? Because no one's going to have heard of it. But if you worked for
Facebook or Google or Twitter,
or yeah, exactly. If you have worked for companies that give you immediately brand recognition, and this, you notice how we keep on bringing up the word brand. So if it gives you recognition and it helps you towards your topic sentence again, then use it. So you may mix it up with function and title, and that's it. It's one sentence. Number 4. Where you've worked, where you've utilized these skills. And most people think that's most of a pitch, and no, it's not. Minor part.
And what's interesting, and as a recruiter, I learned this very, very early on, is that it's easier to sell a person to a client when they've worked for organizations that have some recognition. Because it's like, to use a phrase from marketing, it's like product line extension.
Exactly.
You're trying to step in on everyone's perception of the brand to curry favor with the listener. So, again, using some of the examples I did before, you have a different impression of someone who's worked for Google or Facebook or Twitter or Microsoft, different than you might have for someone who's worked at Goldman Sachs or J.P. Morgan Chase or Bank of America, yet different than someone who's worked for 3 guys in a garage consulting firm for 6 months.
And that's what you can get across in one sentence. And you can cross those lines. Maybe you want them to perceive, let's say you're looking for consulting, it's, hey, I've worked in everywhere. I can do it. I can do any kind of organization ranging from Goldman Sachs to the garage. I can do it all. So the 5th part, Jeff, the 5th is the one that people really screw up, which is you got to be thinking about this whole 1.5 to 2 minutes as an advertisement. This is you're pounding your point. You're pounding your brand. You're making sure they get – you never want to be that person who they say, I don't know what to do with you. I have a bunch of clients like that right now that nobody ever knows what to do with. So you have to make it easy. So that means you've already said a label or a positioning statement. You've given 2 or 3 skills or experiences. You've talked about an unusual selling proposition. You've talked about where you worked. Sum it up. That's number 5. So you've already said all this stuff. Now say it a different way in 1 or 2 sentences. This is how we get you to brand. Make sure they understand. And I got to tell you something. This isn't just to answer the question, tell me about yourself, or to follow up Jeff's question about clarifying what the responsibilities are and then pitching yourself to that. It's also for how do you write a follow-up marketing letter to a person that you just met for the first time and it isn't an interview? How do you introduce yourself on a new job? How do you write a thank you after an interview? How do you introduce yourself to a stranger when you're trying to approach them to get a meeting? So you take pieces of your pitch and you tailor it and you use it. And that means you're always ready to explain yourself, and your brand is out there and it doesn't become some kind of amorphous blob that no one understands.
So when you talk about summing it up, think about one of your clients, for example. Maybe you change some of the places they've worked or however you might pitch it. Give everyone a sense of what one of these summaries might look like, or how they might do a minute to minute and a half introduction for themselves.
Okay, you mean the summary that we're talking about, correct?
Well, it's either that or just do one an example of an entire minute and a half branding pitch.
All right, I'm going to give you a branding pitch. This is one that I made up for myself years ago when, I'd say 15 years ago, when somebody asked me, give me an example, just like you did. Give me an example of one and a half. So I made one up for where I was, maybe it was 20 years ago, where I was at that particular point in my life, and I will admit to you now, Jeff, and to anybody who's listened, that half of it's a lie, but it's a pitch. Okay, so the first part, I'll just go through it. I am an employment specialist. And what I mean by an employment specialist is a person who understands the entire process of employment. And that ranges from, one, getting into the organization. That may mean recruiting, staffing, advertising, networks, and how to utilize social media and how to get people into the organization. Two, employee relations, which is helping people navigate the organization while there. And three, which has been the bulk of my career, which is transitioning out of the organization, where I had a considerable amount of experience in outplacement and later on in career transition advising, pretty much. So it's getting in, staying in, leaving, and I would say, if anything makes me unusual in the field, it's an ability to get up on the platform and teach it and be able to talk to large groups of people in an organization about it. So all in all, you would say, if somebody asked me, what are you? You'd say, this is a guy who really knows the world of work. That's a pitch. Now, the lie, Jeff, I need to tell you the lie, was I never did employee relations. I just threw that in there. And the reason, now here, this is an important thing. The reason I personally made up, or I used the getting up in front of groups and platform, a lot of people can do that. It doesn't sound so terribly unusual, except in my field it was very unusual. Most of the people in my work, in my line of work, are one-on-one types, or somewhat introverted, and really like that one-on-one advisement. And I'm different that way. I like large groups and I like large platforms. I enjoy teaching. Always have. Been doing it for my entire life. So that made me different. And the firms that I was talking to were interested in that one thing a lot, which is what I found out through my network.
That's very interesting. And I just want to make sure, because we're starting to come up toward the end of our time with one another, that I've gotten a summary that I want to share with everyone. So neither of us believes in the idea of that traditional 30-second elevator pitch. And what replaces it is in this minute and a half to 2 minutes where it's broken into 5 parts. A clear statement of who you are, and what it is that you do. So people become very clear about what it is that you do in this world of work. And then you go into 2 or 3 different skill areas, things that you have experience with. You segue into the unusual selling proposition. What makes you different than the ordinary individual that they might run into, who has similar skills but is ordinary by comparison. A sentence or so that might speak to where you've worked in order to capitalize on some of the brands that you've been associated with. If they're a positive brand. If they're a negative brand, because we've been reading about them perhaps from a bankruptcy or the Justice Department is going after that, we might glaze over that instead. And then finally, we go into a summary, kind of like a final capsule for an ad for who you are and what it is that you do.
Yes.
How have I done?
Perfectly, actually. Good listener.
I try. Thank you so much, Ellis.
I was very happy to do it.
Thank you. You've got a book out now called In Search of the Fun Forever Job. What's that about?
It's really a soup to nuts, very, very direct kind of approach to transitions. So it's very personal because I talk about my own bizarre little byways and highways at the beginning of it, and then it takes us through how do you get started, what's the 30,000-foot view of this process, and then the nitty-gritty nuts and bolts, networking, interviewing, negotiating, and how to deal with the emotions of it. So it's very straightforward. It's very, short. It's a quick one-day read, and it'll just tell you, here's how to do it. Do it this way. Boom, 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 boom. Career Strategies That Work is the subtitle.
What was the subtitle again?
Career Strategies That Work.
Thank you. Available at?
Available at Amazon and Kindle and Nook and Sony and Smashwords. I think that's enough. It's in iTunes.
Definitely in iTunes. I happen to have seen it there recently. So thank you for being on. Folks, we're going to be back next time with more advice for you for job hunting. I'm Jeff Altman. If you have questions about any element of job hunting, if you'd like help putting together one of these 90-second presentations or 2-minute presentations, feel free to reach out to me through liveperson.com or through VIPpersonalsearch.com. These are venues where I can work with people one-on-one to help you move your job search forward more quickly. If you're interested in working with me, again, as a coach, I'll remind you that there are programs I've put together that will help you really accelerate your job search and get you to work quickly. So I'm Jeff Altman.